that is really that touches on another problem that I think we're seeing with kids not being able to think critically, but that's like tied to a whole much bigger issue. But okay, so I'll move us back to the idea of mental health and the doom and gloom in the classroom. But do you feel like, so with what you have seen in talking about the curriculum again, do you think that environment is, when kids are immersed in it all day long, is possibly contributing to some of these negative outcomes that we're seeing?
Yeah, it would probably be inappropriate for me to say. I'm not a psychiatrist or psychologist. I'd be out of my depth. But as a teacher and a parent, you tend to think, how could it not? In other words, if all your child is viewing is doom and gloom all day, then at some point that must be, that pushes them into despair, or at least runs the risk of it. We haven't talked about SEL. I'm not social and emotional learning. I'm not one of those who views this as like a Trojan horse or some such. But what I do view it as is somewhat of an I don't want to say unnecessary, but inappropriate intrusion into the school day. I'll tell you another quick war story from my time in the classroom. So when I was teaching fifth grade in the South Bronx, just to paint the picture for you, it was the lowest performing school in New York City's lowest performing district. I mean, fewer than 1 out of 5 kids reading and doing math on grade level. And there was a colleague of mine who I heard her say on more than one occasion, well, look, reading and math are important, but I teach the whole child. Before we talked about SEL, we talked about things like, teaching the whole child. This stuff never goes away, Missy. It just changes its names. So back then it was teaching the whole child. If you think about that statement, what was she saying? She was saying, in my estimation, look, I know I'm not a very good teacher. I know I'm not really that good at teaching reading and math, but I'm empathetic. I care about kids. I'm a good role model. I don't want to diminish that. That's important. I want my child to be in front of somebody who cares about her. But it's not enough, right? In other words, what she was giving herself was permission, or permission to not only not feel like she's a bad teacher, but to go home feeling good about herself. So this is what I worry about with SEL. It's a permission structure to do something other than be good at what our core function is. And what is our core function? Reading, math, history, citizenship. It's not therapy. And I do worry sometimes that it's one thing if your child's teacher is a poor reading or math teacher. It's another thing altogether if they're a poor therapist.
Yeah.
So, we need to think very, very carefully about whether we want, this is, I think, my main critique of SEL. It's not some of the concerns about a Trojan horse for Marxism or whatnot. It's like, this just may not be what we want schools to be doing. And as soon as I say that, Missy, I want to be careful. I don't want to pretend that the mental health crisis in our schools is not a real and pressing concern. It is. But where is it written that the school has to be the service provider of first and last resort? In other words, we need to think very, very seriously about this from a couple of dimensions. One, is it mission creep? Is it asking schools to do something that they're not necessarily? I mean, I get it. Yeah, why do you put it in the schools? Because that's where the kids are. But typically, and I think back again on the school where I taught for many years in the South Bronx. Typically, it's the lowest performing institution in a given community. So why would you ask an institution that is struggling to do its rock bottom basic job to do more? And when you do that, aren't you creating a permission structure for it to fail at that core function and perhaps not be effective at the thing that you're trying to fix? So I don't want to diminish the idea that there's, that we need to take seriously the mental health crisis, but we need to take seriously the idea that we might be asking the wrong people to solve it.
I appreciate that perspective because I know you've said elsewhere that we keep putting everything on teachers, that
Right.
asking them to solve all the problems, which I will frankly say, prior to working with Moms for Liberty, I really don't know that I necessarily felt that